The bone in the Kuiper Belt. I am recording this from the cold edge of everything you think you know. By the time this reaches you, if it ever does, the data relays anchored in the Kuiper Belt will have already fallen silent. You will see it as a technical fault at first, a software crash, an unexpected cascade of hardware failures in a region of space where repair crews are impossibly expensive. You will not understand that what died out here was not a machine or a crew. It was a diagnosis. My name is Dr. Rowan Hale. I was lead astrophysicist on Outrider Station, a deep survey platform parked just outside the chaotic inner boundary of the Kuiper Belt. We were supposed to be a footnote in the history of astronomy, quietly mapping frozen debris, minor planets, and long-period comets, handing the spotlight to bigger, brighter missions closer to the sun. Instead, we found a bone. And in touching it, we learned what the universe really is. We learned what we are. And we learned that the body we inhabit has finally noticed the tumor. The object that killed us started out as a line of numbers on a screen. "New KBO," Lynn said, leaning back from her console. "That's weird." Outrider's command deck was dim, lit mostly by the soft blue wash of holographic displays. Outside the panoramic viewport, the Kuiper Belt glowed as a thin, dusty smudge against the black. We saw nothing with our eyes that the instruments didn't already whisper about first. I drifted over to Lynn's station, hand over hand along the rails. Even after years out here, I still moved like a visitor, conscious of every gesture in microgravity. "What's weird?" I asked. She flicked the data toward me, and a translucent panel bloomed in front of my face. Designation KBO Theta 943. Albedo anomalously high. Density absurd. "It's too bright," she said, "and too heavy." I ran the figures again, automatically. Some stubborn part of me still convinced the software was buggy, but the numbers held. KBO Theta 943 was small, only about 20 kilometers across, but its mass belonged to something much larger. Its orbit, too, had a slight precession that didn't match the surrounding debris. It cut through the Kuiper Belt like a needle threading flesh. "Metallic," I guessed. Lynn shrugged. "Spectrum's all wrong. No absorption lines I recognize, like crystallized something I don't know." From the other side of the deck, Commander Reyes swiveled in his chair. "Problem?" he asked. "Puzzle," I said, "which is worse depending on who's asking." Reyes gave the faint, humorless smile I had come to recognize as his version of a joke. "Anything that weird in my sky is a problem until you prove otherwise. Can we get a closer look?" Lynn and I exchanged a glance. "We can nudge Spindle," she said. "Give it a flyby." Spindle was one of our autonomous survey drones, a spidery, skeletal thing with high-gain antennas and a suite of instruments more sensitive than anything humanity had launched previously. It orbited Outrider in a lazy halo, sleeping until we had something worth waking it for. "We'll have to use some fuel," Lynn added, "but it's not like traffic is overloaded out here." Reyes nodded. "Do it. I want more than guesses when I send the daily report to Earth." I remember, absurdly, being annoyed. We were already years behind schedule on the mapping program, and I had little patience left for curiosities. The universe was full of weird rocks. That was, in a sense, why we were here. But I had a quota of weird I was allowed to care about, and an object 20 kilometers across that refused to behave like a rock was still, fundamentally, a rock. I did not yet understand that it was a rib. Spindle's trajectory adjustment took 8 hours to plan and 10 days to execute. In that time, KBO Theta 943 became familiar in the way unblinking things can become familiar. We tracked it, simulated its orbit, watched how it ignored the subtle collective gravitational tug of the Kuiper debris, and slid along a path as if some deeper, invisible geometry guided it. We nicknamed it the Shard, because it glittered. As Spindle coasted closer, its cameras sent us images. Not the charcoal black, ice-dusted potato shape we expected, but something that glowed faintly even in the deep dark, a raw facet of crystal reflecting no light source we could identify. It looked like a fragment of broken diamond, edges worn, surface crazed with fractures and channels. Some of those channels formed patterns that made my stomach twitch when I stared too long, spirals and lattices that almost resolved into something familiar before my brain recoiled. "Jesus," muttered Reyes, standing beside me as the images updated. "That's not a rock." "No," I said quietly, "it is." Spindle's spectrometer returned more puzzles. The shard's lattice vibrated with thermal energy inconsistent with its surroundings, yet not quite warm. It emitted a thin, constant whisper of radiation in bands we seldom bothered to monitor, a low murmur at the edge of physics. Not noise. A rhythm. "Listen to this," Lynn said. She had converted the signal into audio, shifting frequencies down into the human hearing range. The speakers on the command deck crackled, then settled into a sound like a heartbeat stretched over minutes, a slow, distant thump, followed by a long, sighing decay. Thump, decay, thump. "Some resonance in the lattice," I said, forcing rational words out past the prickle at the back of my neck. "Thermal cycling, hard vacuum, there are natural oscillators." Lynn didn't argue, she just let the sound play. It was too regular, too deliberate. 2 days later, Spindle's robotic arm reached out and touched the shard. Every instrument we had saturated at once. For 3 seconds, Outrider's systems went blind under a wash of signal so dense it read as pure white. When the noise cleared, nothing in the outer system was where it had been. Not physically. The planet still wheeled around the sun, the Kuiper Belt still shed its slow, icy dust into the dark. But the background changed. You grow used to the cosmic microwave background when you live your life buried in data. It is the universe's old scar, a uniform hiss of relic radiation from the Big Bang, smeared almost evenly across the sky. It is not supposed to move. "Rowan," Lynn whispered, eyes wide, as she pulled the latest sky map up beside the old one. "Look." Tiny differences at first, a slightly deeper anisotropy here, a lopsided temperature fluctuation there, like bruises blooming across a body. The overall brightness of the CMB had risen by an amount so small no optical instrument would have noticed, but our sensors did. And the pattern of tiny hot and cold spots had shifted. It looked horribly, like an enormous face turning in its sleep. The debate over what to do with the shard lasted 20 hours. That's all. 20 hours between we found something strange, and we are going to bring a piece of it inside the station. This is the part you will want to condemn later, the arrogance, the stupidity, the inevitability. But consider this, humanity has always touched the unknown. We stick our hands in fires to see how hot they are. We break apart dangerous animals to see how they work. We split atoms by smashing them together and hope the chain reaction stops when and where we expect. We are a species intoxicated by the phrase, "what if?" Outrider was no different. We were scientists perched on the frozen lip of the solar system, and someone had just found a shard of something that made the universe flinch. So we made a plan. "We'll extract a sample," I said, staring at the grainy image of Spindle hovering near the shard. Tiny, microscopic, sealed in vacuum the whole way, no direct contact. Reyes folded his arms. "We're not a biolab, Rowan." "It isn't biological," I said. "Nothing about the spectrum suggests organics." "And yet," Lynn put in, "the internal channels look a hell of a lot like osteons." Reyes frowned. "Like what?" "Bone," I said softly. "The microstructure looks like bone, just scaled up, way up." We sat in silence for a moment, each of us staring at the frozen frame Spindle had captured as it circled the fragment. The channels in the crystalline lattice branched and looped in patterns eerily reminiscent of human histology slides, except each channel was dozens of meters wide. Imagine a femur the size of Pluto shattered into shards and flung into the dark. Imagine finding a splinter of it, still humming with a memory of what it had once belonged to. "That's crazy," Reyes murmured. "So is the universe," I replied. In the end, curiosity beat caution like it always does. We instructed Spindle to fire a microdrill into a relatively flat portion of the shard, collect less than a milligram of crystalline dust, and seal it in a magnetic trap. Then we recalled the drone. In retrospect, we never stood a chance. The moment Spindle docked with Outrider, the station began to dream. The first dream belonged to me. We were in the sampling lab, all three of us crowded around the sealed chamber where the microgram of crystal dust spun in its magnetic cage, a tiny ghost glittering blue under the lab lights. "We'll run low-energy scans first," I said, fingers dancing over the controls. "Keep the interaction minimal. I want to know what this lattice looks like at the atomic level." Lynn nodded, making adjustments. Reyes floated behind us, arms hooked loosely through a strap on the bulkhead, watching with a soldier's practiced wariness. "You sure it's safe?" he asked. "No," I admitted, "but nothing's safe out here." I initiated the scan. Low-energy X-rays lanced through the chamber, scattering off the crystal dust. The detectors sang. The computer began to stitch together a diffraction pattern. Then the lab dissolved. Not physically. My hands were still there, my body anchored in microgravity, the instruments humming. But my senses tore away from the immediate and were dragged somewhere else, like a fish yanked out of deep water. For an instant I knew, with the unreasonable conviction of dream logic, that I had become the X-ray beam, a thin, probing thread of energy sliding into the lattice of the crystal. And something slid back along me. I saw a structure too, vast for my mind to hold. Not a being, not at first, just layers upon layers of tissue, filaments of galaxies woven into cords, those cords braided into trunks of superclusters, all embedded in a translucent medium that shimmered with dark matter. Between those filaments yawned voids, but even the voids were not empty. They thrummed with low energy, like interstitial fluid filling the spaces between cells. I understood, again, with that horrible dream certainty, that I was looking at a cross-section of the universe. Not metaphorically, literally. Cosmic filaments were nerve bundles. Galaxies were clusters of specialized cells. Dark matter halos were the extracellular matrix. The microwave background was the lingering warmth of embryogenesis. The universe was not a stage. It was tissue. Living tissue. And we were inside it. Then the view pulled back. Scales telescoped. The web of galaxy filaments folded into a rounded shape, its contours blurred by dimensions I had no names for. It curled around itself like a sleeping animal, enormous beyond measure, its bulk dotting a blackness that was not our space, but something beyond. I saw ribs of condensed spacetime arching like the supports of a cathedral. I saw organs. A wordless intuition told me they were organs, formed from collapsed clusters, pulsing with energy that made supernovae look like sparks. I saw what might have been a spine, a column of linked singularities, each one a black hole drilled through the center of a great cluster, aligned with a precision no natural process could justify. And buried in that impossible anatomy, like calcium woven into collagen, I saw a skeleton. One fragment of that skeleton had broken off ages ago and drifted idly through the tissues of the universe body, slipping between filaments, dragged along by gradients of dark energy, until it came to rest in a backwater system whose tiny, feverish inhabitants were just beginning to notice the sky. When my awareness snapped back into my skull, I was screaming. My lungs dragged in air too fast for the station's scrubbers to keep up. My hands clawed at the console, fingers cramping. Tears floated away from my face in shimmering spheres. Lynn popped her restraints and grabbed my shoulders. Rowan, hey, breathe, what happened? I stared at her, heart pounding, half convinced I would look down and see my chest translucent, my ribs replaced with shining, crystalline arcs. I saw something, I whispered. Ray's voice was tight. What sort of something? I looked past them at the crystal dust, still spinning in its magnetic trap, undisturbed. The universe, I said. I saw the universe. Ray's frowned, brow furrowing. We've all seen the universe. Not like this, I said. My voice shook. Not from the inside. I expected disbelief, jokes, a requisition for a psychological evaluation. Instead, Lynn quietly locked the lab door and said, "Tell us everything." So I did. I described the tissues, the filaments, the organs of clustered galaxies. I told them about the great spinal column of black holes, about the ribs of condensed space-time. I told them the certainty that the universe was a body, that what we had called cosmology was, in truth, anatomy. Rays listened without interruption, jaw clenched. Lynn's face shifted from skepticism to unease to a pale, strained fascination. "This is some kind of hallucination," Ray said finally. "A seizure, maybe a response to a weird M field. That dust is doing something to your brain." "Yes," I said, "it is, and that's the point." He scowled. "The point." I turned back to the chamber. "That crystal," I said, "is bone. It's a fragment of that skeleton. We touched it with energy and it touched us back. It showed me the whole." "Why, how?" Lynn murmured. "Bones store memory," I said. It was something my mother had told me once when she was still alive and working as a forensic anthropologist. "You can read a life in a person's bones," she'd said. "Trauma, disease, diet, stress, how they grew, how they moved. On our scale, bone stores a record of the organism it belongs to," I continued. "Maybe the same principle applies up there. The lattice remembered what it was part of, and when we energized it, it shared." Silence stretched in the lab. Rays rubbed his temples. "Okay," he said slowly. "Let's assume, for the sake of argument, that you're not just suffering from isolation psychosis. What then? What does it mean that the universe is a body?" The answer rose in my throat like bile. "It means we're inside someone," I whispered, "and everything we do happens inside their flesh." Lynn swallowed. "Then what are we?" The second revelation came slowly, like a bruise spreading under the skin of my thoughts. In the days that followed, none of us left the lab for long. We slept in shifts, ate ration bars without tasting them, ran tests that we barely understood the implications of. We discovered that the crystal dust resisted every attempt to alter it. We tried to melt it with focused lasers. Its temperature climbed asymptotically toward a limit, then refused to budge further, as if the lattice had decided it was warm enough. We tried to crack it with sudden pressure changes. The dust refused to fracture. We bombarded it with particles. The scattering patterns shuddered, then reorganized, as if the lattice was accommodating the impact, folding around it. It behaved less like a mineral and more like tissue. Specialized tissue. "Bone," Lynn muttered one night, eyes rimmed red. "Bone evolved as a support structure, sure, but also as mineral storage, as a blood factory. It's not just scaffolding, it's an organ." "An immune organ," I said. She looked up sharply. My second dream hadn't been a dream. It had been an interpretation. I had woken in my bunk with the echo of it still burning in my mind. A sense of something vast and slow becoming aware of an irritation deep within its tissues. A knot of uncontrolled growth, cells dividing wildly, ignoring the biochemical signals that told them to stop. Cancer. On the cosmic scale, those knots of uncontrolled growth were civilizations like ours. Voracious, exponential, burning through resources, altering their environment, building giant structures, pumping waste heat into the surrounding medium. We called it progress. From the perspective of a body, it was metastasis. Think about it, I said now, leaning over the console. What do advanced civilizations do when they get going? They mine stars. They build Dyson swarms. They re-engineer planets. They fill their local volumes of space with artificial structures and energy signatures, growing in complexity and density until their neighborhoods look nothing like the rest of the cosmic tissue. Tumors, Lynn whispered. I nodded. They grow, they intrude. They ignore the signals that should keep their behavior stable, and if they learn to move between stars, they metastasize. They seed other regions with the same runaway pattern. Ray shook his head slowly, as if trying to physically dislodge the idea. You're saying we're cancer, he said. I'm saying, I replied, that from the perspective of the body we inhabit, we behave like cancer. And the bone? Lynn asked, voice small. I looked at the crystal dust, its faint blue shimmer constant. What does bone do when a cancer in the marrow threatens the body? I asked. It calls for help. It mobilizes stem cells, immune factors, blood. It signals. Ray swore softly. You think the shard is what? An immune sensor? Yes, I said. How long has it been here? Lynn asked. I shrugged helplessly. Longer than the solar system, I said. Maybe it drifted for eons. Maybe it was placed. Maybe the body's immune system seeded these bones everywhere, in every filament dense enough to grow trouble, waiting for something like us to poke it. Ray stared at me. And when we poked it, he said slowly, it woke up. As if on cue, the station lights flickered. The lab speakers crackled, and the sound Lynn had recorded from the shard's radiation shifted. The slow, heartbeat-like thump we had grown uncomfortably used to grew faster. Thump, 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 thump. Like something roused from torpor. Like an immune node smelling infection. The changes in the sky came faster after that. We weren't the only ones watching the universe. Even from Outrider, we could pull telemetry from distant observatories, relays, and telescopes scattered throughout the solar system. A gamma-ray observatory orbiting Jupiter detected a sudden cluster of bursts from a region of space previously quiet. The bursts weren't the usual chaotic tantrums of collapsing stars. They were aligned, their beams crossing at a single focal point far beyond our local group. Neutrino detectors on and under Earth's surface began to pick up a rising flux of high-energy particles, streaming in from seemingly random directions. But when Lynn plotted them in aggregate, a grim pattern emerged. They're mapping something, she whispered. Mapping what? Rays asked. She swallowed. Us, she said. They're building a model of where the dense, noisy regions are, where the cancer is. Everywhere we looked, the universe's slow processes were accelerating in ways that made no sense under our old laws. Dormant quasars flared to life in distant galaxies, their jets lancing out like needles. Pockets of dark matter shifted, condensing along certain filaments, as if thickening around infected tissue. Immune response, I said hoarsely, watching the data flood in. It's triggering an immune response. Lynn looked from the displays to the crystal dust and back again. But how? She asked. A tiny fragment here in our system, and suddenly things billions of light-years away are reacting. The signaling speed alone. Doesn't have to be faster than light, I said. Not in the way we think of it. We're embedded in this tissue. The bone isn't sending a signal through space. It's altering the state of the medium itself. The body feels it everywhere. Rays grabbed the back of my chair, knuckles white. If you're right, he said quietly, we just told the universe where to aim. At us, I asked. We're tiny, insignificant. Not just at us, Lynn said. At all of it, every advanced civilization, every cluster of metastasis. We woke up something that wants to cut the cancer out. I thought of all the silence we had already observed in the sky. The famous Fermi Paradox, the empty airwaves, the lack of megastructures where, statistically, some should exist. Maybe the immune system had been working this whole time. Maybe we had just triggered the next wave. The argument about what to do with the shard didn't last as long as the first one. "Dump it," Ray said. "Launch the sample back into the belt, smash the drone, cut contact." "And then what?" I shot back. "Pretend we never saw any of this. You can't unring the bell, Commander. The sky has already changed. Whatever we woke is awake." "Then maybe we can at least make sure it doesn't get more information," he snapped. "Maybe if we cut the connection, the immune cascade slows." "Or maybe," Lynn said quietly, "we're the only ones who know what's happening. If we destroy the sample, we lose our chance to understand it." Ray's rounded on her. "You want to keep poking it." "I want to know if there's any way to survive this," she retorted. "Any way to negotiate or hide or adapt. If we just dump it and hope for the best, we're blind." They both looked at me. "Rowan," Ray's asked, "you're the one it's been talking to. What do you think?" I closed my eyes. I could still feel the echo of the visions in the back of my mind, like afterimages burned into my retinas. Each time I had gone near the crystal, each scan we ran, the impressions grew sharper. Not words, not images exactly. Understanding. The universe body was old, older than our physics could comfortably express. It had grown in a larger medium I could scarcely conceptualize, absorbing energy, clumping matter, developing structure. Along the way, fluctuations in its tissues had given rise to patterns, life, consciousness, intelligence. We were one such pattern. But we were not the first. Others had sprung up in other filaments, in other regions of its flesh. Some had burned bright and fast, engineering continental-scale computers, harnessing stars, then collapsing under their own excess. Some had managed to spread, infecting neighboring regions, reconfiguring the local tissue so extensively that it threatened the function of entire galactic organs. In response, the body had developed an immune system. It learned to recognize the signature of runaway growth, distinctive energy spectra, waste heat signatures, patterns of electromagnetic chatter. It seeded the universe with specialized structures, bones, nodes, cysts, built to detect those signatures and coordinate a response. Some responses were precise, targeted bursts, collapsing specific stars, triggering localized cataclysms. Others were drastic, reconfiguring the vacuum state in a region, effectively euthanizing entire clusters. Across unimaginable spans of time, it had pruned itself, keeping the cancer in check. And now, for the first time, one of those bones had been directly stimulated from within. It had tasted us. "It knows we're here," I said softly. "It knows what we are. We can't undo that." Ray's looked like he wanted to argue, but the fight went out of his shoulders. "So we're screwed," he said flatly. "Not necessarily," Lynn said. We both turned to her. She hesitated, then continued. "Cancer isn't always lethal," she said. "Sometimes the immune system fails. Sometimes the tumor finds ways to hide, molecular tricks, cloaking its markers, or sometimes the tumor and the body reach an uneasy equilibrium. The growth slows. The system rebalances around it." "We're not talking about chemotherapy," Ray said. "No," she replied. "We're talking about survival strategies. Maybe we can change our signature, mask ourselves." I thought about the roaring, hungry sprawl of human civilization, the lattice of satellites, the power grids, the data networks, the expanding sphere of radio noise, the fusion drives, the matter-antimatter experiments, the proto-Dyson projects. "How?" I asked. "I don't know yet," she admitted. "That's why we need the sample." Ray's exhaled slowly. "Fine," he said. You have 48 hours. After that, if we don't have a concrete plan, we dump it, agreed. Lynn nodded reluctantly. I nodded too, though a hollow dread had already taken up residence in my chest. I didn't tell them that, in my last visitation, I had sensed something else. The bone wasn't just calling the immune system. It was testing us. The first physical changes started with Lynn. She staggered into the lab mid-shift, one hand pressed to her chest, eyes wide. "Rowan," she gasped, "feel this." I pushed off the console and caught her by the shoulders. Her heart hammered against my palm, not with the staccato rhythm of panic, but with a strange double beat. Lub-dub, lub-dub, lub-dub-lub. A syncopation that didn't match the pulse at her neck. "Are you in pain?" I asked. "No," she said, voice trembling. "It just feels wrong, like my heart's remembering another rhythm." Ray's arrived seconds later, drawn by the commotion. He checked her vitals, scanned her with the station's medical suite. "Structurally, she's fine," he said, baffled. "No arrhythmia, no ischemia. It's like her entire system is shifting into a different baseline." Over the next few hours, the anomalies multiplied. Lynn's body temperature rose by 1/2 degree, then another half, settling at a new plateau that should have qualified as a low-grade fever, but didn't come with any of the other symptoms. Her skin took on a faint, translucent sheen. Under certain angles of light, I could see faint lines beneath the surface, tiny, shimmering threads like capillaries if capillaries glowed. "It's adapting you," I whispered, horrified. "To what?" she asked. I couldn't answer, because by then I had my own changes to worry about. I began to hear things. Not voices, exactly. Not in any language, but patterns layered over the hum of the station, over the crackle of radiation on the hull. Structures in the noise that resolved into meaning if I let my mind sink into them. I knew when a gamma-ray burst had flared on the far side of the galaxy before the instruments did. I felt the shift in the neutrino flux like a pressure change behind my eyes. One night, our concept of night being a relative term on a rotating station, I floated alone in the observatory dome, staring at the stars. Out beyond the scattered diamonds of the Kuiper Belt, the Milky Way was a band of silver frost. Then, right in front of me, a bright point winked out. Not dimmed. Disappeared. I blinked, thinking at first it was a glitch in the projection. But the instruments confirmed it. A distant star, unimaginably far away, had vanished, its light cut off not by interstellar dust, not by eclipsing bodies, but by something else. I reached for it with my new sense, and felt a sensation like a single cell in your body might feel when a white blood cell brushes past. The star hadn't died naturally. It had been excised. "Rowan," Lynn asked over the intercom, "you awake?" "I'm here," I said, voice hollow. "You need to come to the lab," she said, "now." The shard had changed. Our microgram of dust, once a faintly glowing mist, had condensed. In the central chamber, suspended in the magnetic trap, floated a single crystalline sliver no larger than a grain of rice. It was perfect, facets crisp, edges razor-sharp, its interior laced with microscopic channels. "It's growing," Lynn said. "That's impossible," Ray's breathed. "We haven't added any material." I checked the logs. He was right. The chamber had remained sealed. No contamination, no influx of particles. Mass readings, however, had crept up by tiny increments, as if the sliver was conjuring itself out of vacuum fluctuations, rewiring the zero-point field into matter. "Bone remodels in response to stress," Lynn whispered, transfixed. "Osteoclasts break, osteoblasts build. It shifts, adapts. Maybe this is the same principle, it's remodeling." "Into what?" Ray's demanded. The answer came to me from that new, terrible sense I held like a parasite in my head. "Into a key," I said. They both stared at me. "A key to what?" Ray's asked. To the immune system, I said. To higher access. It's attuning itself to us, shaping into something we can use, or something that can use us. Lynn swallowed. Rowan, she said, when you connect with it, when you see the body, do you ever get the sense it sees you back? Yes, I said. Her face paled. And what does it see? I struggled to put it into words. A signal, I said finally. A possibility, a pattern that could go either way. Either way, Reyes repeated. I looked at him. Cancer, I said, or immune system. Silence. Understanding filtered through their expressions like dawn. You mean, Reyes said slowly, we could switch sides. It's not sides, I said quietly. It's function. The body doesn't care about morality, only about maintaining homeostasis. Right now, we behave like a destabilizing growth. But if we could reconfigure ourselves, our civilization, our technology, to serve the body's stability instead of undermining it. Lynn finished the thought. We become part of the immune system, she whispered. We help it find and remove the worst cancers. Reyes recoiled as if she'd struck him. You're talking about helping it destroy other civilizations, he said. Maybe even ours. Maybe ours is already condemned, Lynn shot back. Maybe the only way any fragment of us survives is by aligning with the larger system. Her voice cracked. I don't want to die, Reyes. I don't want everyone we've ever known to just get pruned. If the only alternative is to become part of something bigger. She trailed off, eyes glittering. I felt sick. The worst part was that, on some raw, instinctual level, the idea made sense. In the vision, I had seen regions of the universe body where previously chaotic tissue had been replaced by organized, lattice-like structures. Filaments aligned neatly, energy flows streamlined. Those regions pulsed with calm, stable activity. I had understood then that they were old sites of cancer, now subsumed into the immune architecture. Metastasis turned into lymph nodes. Even if we could do that, Reyes said hoarsely, it wouldn't be us anymore, not the way we understand ourselves. Maybe that's the price, Lynn said. They both looked at me again, waiting. The shard's new sliver spun slowly in its trap, catching the lab lights. In its gleam, I heard the distant thunder of supernovae being snuffed out like candles. The order from Earth came 12 hours later. By then, our bursts of encrypted data had reached the inner system, been decoded, analyzed, argued over by committees we would never meet. The message was short. Outrider Station. Priority Alpha Directive. Terminate all interaction with extrasolar object KBO Theta 943 immediately. Dispose of sample BY ejection into deep space. Document procedures. Suspend further operations pending investigation. Expect crew extraction within 18 MONTHS. Space Science Directorate. 18 months, Reyes muttered, scrolling back and forth across the message as if a different meaning might appear. They think we'll just sit out here and wait while the universe reconfigures itself. Can you blame them? Lynn asked. What are they supposed to do? There's no protocol for universe is a living body and might be about to kill us. Reyes looked at me. Well, he asked, orders are clear, we dump it. I stared at the sliver in the trap. If we followed orders, we would eject the sample via one of Outrider's service airlocks, give it a shove into an orbit that would take it away from the station. Maybe it would drift forever. Maybe it would find another host. We would spend a lonely 1.5 years waiting for a crewed ship that might never come, while Earth used our data to panic in increasingly sophisticated ways. Or we could defy orders. We need more time, I said. Reyes's eyes hardened. We have a direct command. So what? I snapped. By the time they decide on a new strategy, the immune response will be fully underway. Stars are already winking out. Neutrino flux is building. There might not be an Earth to send us extraction. Lin flinched. Rowan, we are the only ones in direct contact with a piece of the immune system, I pressed. If there's any hope of influencing how the body reacts to us, it's through this. If we just dump it, we surrender any agency. That's assuming we have any, Reyes said. You're assuming a human brain can negotiate with something that thinks in galaxy clusters. I'm assuming it already is, I shot back. Every time I touch it, I feel attention, assessment. We've been noticed. That's already a negotiation of sorts. Reyes floated in silence for a long moment. Finally, he said, if we keep it and Earth finds out, we'll be branded traitors. If we dump it and Earth dies anyway, what will we be? I asked. He closed his eyes. Damned, he whispered. In the end, he compromised. We fake it, he said. We send telemetry, staged footage of a disposal sequence, make it look convincing. We keep the real sample hidden, continue the research off the books. If we find anything useful, we send it through secure channels. You think they won't notice the difference? Lin asked. He shrugged. By the time they do, it won't matter. We rigged Spindle to perform a ceremonial disposal. In full view of Outrider's external cameras, the drone carried a sealed container, ostensibly housing the sample, out through a service hatch. It drifted a safe distance away, then used its small thrusters to launch the container into an escape trajectory. The container tumbled into the dark. Minutes later, we triggered a microcharge in its hull, lighting it up in the infrared. To any sensor watching from afar, it would look like debris being scattered. Meanwhile, the real sample remained in the lab, its sliver resting quietly in a secondary magnetic trap hidden behind a panel. I watched the telemetry stream toward the inner system and felt a hollow ache in my chest. We had just lied to the rest of our species. For their sake, I told myself. For all our sakes. The universe, of course, didn't care. The immune response continued to blossom. Telescopes began reporting an increase in high-energy events, not just in the distant cosmos, but uncomfortably near. 2 stars in the Orion Arm went nova weeks ahead of their expected timeframes, their surrounding systems scoured. A handful of pulsars shifted their emission patterns as if being driven by an external hand. Closer to home, subtle anomalies cropped up in the behavior of cosmic rays, their incidence clustering in patterns that matched the distribution of human-built structures in orbit. It's triangulating, I said, hands trembling as I traced the ghostly outlines. It's mapping our technological footprint. How long do we have? Lin asked. I closed my eyes, reaching not with instruments but with that awful new sense. For a moment I felt the universe body as a whole, its attention like a pressure gradient rolling through its tissues. It was slow, yes, but inexorable. It's already started, I whispered. We're just on the leading edge. Rays floated near the viewport, gaze fixed on the distant stars. If we give it what it wants, he said slowly, do you think it will spare us? I didn't answer, because by then I was no longer sure what us meant. The shard continued to grow. By the 3rd month, the sliver had reached the size of a fingernail. Its channels had become more complex, their internal branching forming fractal patterns that echoed not just bone, but lymph nodes. It's differentiating, Lin said in hushed awe, evolving from structural tissue into something more specialized. It's turning into a node. A node for what? Reyes asked. Lin glanced at me. I think that's your department, she said. I approached the trap, heart pounding. Every previous contact had been incidental, insight bleeding through during scans, proximity sparking hallucinations. This time, I intended to touch it deliberately. Are you sure about this? Reyes asked. No, I said honestly, but I think this is what it's been waiting for. I maneuvered into the safety harness, strapped myself in, and slipped my hands into the manipulators, two glove-like interfaces that extended into the chamber via robotic arms. The shard hovered inches away, its facets catching the lab lights. I flexed my fingers. "Engaging contact," Lynn said quietly. The manipulators closed around the crystal. The universe opened. Not as a vision this time, not as a metaphor or a dream, but as a direct alteration of my state. I felt my consciousness expand, not outward into space, but inward into structures I had no names for. The boundaries of my body dissolved. My sense of self was peeled from the familiar scaffold of flesh and laid across a different architecture. I was cells in a lymph node, tasting antigens. I was strands of DNA, coiling and uncoiling in response to chemical whispers. I was a cluster of galaxies, bright with the fever of unnatural energy, flagged with markers that screamed danger. The body, I refused to call it anything else now, regarded that bright cluster the way a human might regard a suspicious lump. Then, for the first time, I felt its attention focus on a single, tiny region within that cluster. Outrider Station. Specifically me. The contact was alien beyond words, not emotional, not intellectual, but functional. It evaluated me the way an immune system evaluates cells, checking markers, scanning for signs of self and non-self, normal and abnormal. I realized with a jolt of existential terror that my mind, our minds, our cultures, our art, our wars, were irrelevant to its judgment. It cared only about patterns. Our pattern was cancerous, but the shard had introduced a new variable. Through it, I could influence the signal we were sending. I understood, suddenly, that the sliver wasn't just a key for us to access the immune system. It was a reversible interface. We could, in theory, modulate the markers we presented, alter the pattern of our emissions, cloak ourselves, or, conversely, highlight other regions as more dangerous. The options unspooled in my mind like veins. Hide. Bargain. Collaborate. I sensed other nodes awakening across the cosmos. Distant bones, cysts, and crystalline clusters humming with new activity, each connected to their local tissues, each contributing to a vast assessment network. In many of those regions, the decision had already been made. Excise. In ours, the jury was still out. Not because we were special. Simply because, by sheer accident or design, we were in direct contact with a node and thus had the capacity to respond. My awareness snapped back into my body with a force that made me retch. Lynn was there with a bag. Rays held my shoulders as I convulsed. "Rowan," Lynn cried, "talk to us, what happened?" I spat bile, wiped my mouth and laughed shakily. "We have options," I croaked. We didn't all agree on which option to take. "Masking is the only moral choice," Rays said, pacing the cramped lab as best he could. "We use this interface to hide our signatures, dampen our emissions, make ourselves look benign. We buy time, maybe enough to change our behavior." Lynn shook her head. "You're thinking like a soldier, not an organism," she said. "Masking might work in the short term, but the body adapts. Tumors that hide are one of the deadliest kinds." "So your alternative is what?" he snapped. "Voluntarily paint a target on other civilizations." She hesitated, then nodded. "We reroute the immune response," she said. "There are regions out there that are far more destabilizing than we are. We've seen the data. Mega-engineering projects, galaxy-scale energy harvesting. Their pattern is louder, uglier, more dangerous. If we can steer the body's attention toward them, away from us, we increase our odds." "At the cost of killing them," Rays said flatly. "Billions of lives, maybe more." Lynn's eyes shone with unshed tears. "They're already dead," she whispered. "They just don't know it yet. The immune response is coming for them regardless. All we'd be doing is smoothing the path, ensuring that in the process maybe we get folded into the immune architecture instead of excised. Reyes looked at me. And you, he asked, what does the bone whisper in your ear? Hide, collaborate, or just accept annihilation? I thought of Earth, of the blue curve of it under the station where I'd once trained, clouds veiling continents, of the noise and chaos of its cities, the stupid, earnest, fragile things we built and loved and destroyed. I thought of the body cosmos, and the way in my last contact I had felt a faint curiosity, if such a thing could be called that, about our attempts to engage. Maybe we can do both, I said slowly. Mask ourselves while subtly assisting the immune response elsewhere. Show we're willing to help maintain the whole, but also that we can regulate our own growth. Reyes frowned. Is that possible? I looked at the shard. I don't know, I admitted, but the node is sensitive to gradients. Small changes in the emitted pattern had big interpretive effects. It's like a language, crude but a language. We might be able to express something like, we recognize the dysfunction, we will help contain it, we are transitioning from tumor to immune organ. Lynn exhaled. A remission, she said. Yes, I said. If we can convince it that we're capable of remission, it might spare us, or at least integrate us. Reyes rubbed his face with both hands. You're proposing we partially sacrifice our own autonomy, condemn God knows how many others more fully, and hope that in the long run we get to live as, what? White blood cells. What's the alternative? I asked softly. He didn't answer. None of us slept after that. We began experiments in signal modulation. Using the shard as a focal point, we fed controlled patterns of electromagnetic noise into it, and watched how the background universe changed in response. At first, the effects were subtle. Slight shifts in where the neutrino flux thickened, tiny reweightings of which nascent supernovae collapsed fully into black holes and which fizzled. It was like learning to flex a new muscle. We mapped the parameter space as best we could. Each configuration we tried burning itself into my mind, as a corresponding feeling in the body's response. Slowly, we built a lexicon. This pattern nudged attention away from us, toward a region in the Perseus arm, where a particularly egregious cluster of energy-harvesting structures glowed like malignant tissue. That pattern dampened the intensity of the sweeping gamma-ray bursts, suggesting a lesser intervention. Another seemed to encode acknowledgement. Yes, we see the cancer. Yes, we agree it must be pruned. I became a conduit. Each time I took hold of the shard, my sense of self thinned. I felt less like an individual and more like a process. The body's immune subroutines co-opted portions of my cognition, using them to model outcomes. My dreams, when I managed to sleep, were filled with images of world lines splitting, branching futures where Earth burned, Earth withered slowly, Earth vanished quietly into a reconfigured vacuum. In some of those futures, no humans walked the surface. In others, something that had once been human drifted between the stars, dispatched as part of a repair crew. Lynn's physical changes accelerated. She no longer needed a thermal suit on the colder decks. Her skin's faint luminescence grew brighter, tracing along lines that matched the layouts of major nerves. She reported a constant low-level awareness of radiation flux, like an extra sense. I can feel when the sun hiccups, she said one day, eyes unfocused. It's beautiful. Reyes watched her with a mixture of fear and pity. You're turning into one of its cells, he said. She smiled sadly. Maybe that's better than being one of its cancers. And me, he asked. She studied him. You're still you, she said. Mostly, maybe the body needs skeptics too. We laughed at that, because the alternative was crying. The final choice was forced on us. It came in the form of a spike. One day, without warning, every instrument on Outrider screamed. Cosmic ray counts surged. Gamma detectors saturated. The background hiss of the universe rose in a shrieking, rising whine that set my teeth on edge. "It's here," I gasped, doubling over. Lynn clutched her head. "Something has shifted," she moaned. "A threshold globally." Ray's grabbed the rail, trying to keep his footing in the data storm. "Talk to me," he shouted over the alarms. "What is it?" I forced my consciousness into the patterns, using the shard like a handhold in a hurricane. The body had finished its assessment. The map of the universe, the real one, the functional one, blazed into view. Regions were color-coded in ways that had nothing to do with light and everything to do with deviation from homeostatic norms. Some pockets pulsed with a sick, chaotic red, sites of rampant mega-engineering, vacuum decay experiments, uncontrolled energy release. Others were a calmer orange, growing but not yet catastrophic. Ours glowed a wary yellow. The command had been issued. Across the cosmos, immune interventions cascaded. Jets from active galactic nuclei tilted, sweeping like scalpels. Gamma-ray bursts winked in precise, surgical patterns. Local constants were nudged, destabilizing precarious engineering projects and collapsing overextended civilizations. In some places, entire clusters dimmed as their vacuum states shifted, quarantined in bubbles where the speed of light changed, isolating them from the rest of the body. We had minutes, maybe hours, before the effects reached us in full. Our local region's prescription was lighter than I had feared. A combination of targeted stellar collapses, increased high-energy flux, and subtle shifts in dark matter distribution that would, over millennia, starve us of easy energy. A manageable chemo dose. Unless, of course, we resisted. Unless we clung too hard to our old ways, forcing the body to escalate. I realized then that our experiments had not gone unnoticed. We had already influenced the prescription. Without our interventions via the shard, the yellow of our region might have been orange or red. We had bought ourselves leniency. Now the body waited to see what we would do with it. "Rowan," Ray said, voice ragged, "tell me we have one last card to play." I looked at the shard. "We can accept," I said. "We can send a pattern that encodes compliance. We embrace the therapy. We begin restructuring ourselves according to its needs. In exchange, the dose remains tolerable." "And if we fight?" he asked. I didn't have to close my eyes to see that branch. "Our region goes red," I said, full excision. Rays floated in silence, staring at the swirling data. Lynn reached for my hand. "If we accept," she said softly, "what happens to us?" "We change," I said, "on every level, social, technological, biological. We become something that's less individually free, maybe, but integrated. Integrated into a system that kills anything that threatens its stability," Rays growled. "Into a system that keeps the whole alive," Lynn countered. "Life is always built on someone else's death. This is just scaled up." The alarms wailed. The universe waited. I thought of the people on Earth who had never consented to this choice. The ones who had never looked at the sky and seen a body, only stars. The ones who still believed in stories where humanity was the protagonist, not just a cluster of misbehaving cells. I thought of how utterly, brutally indifferent the body was to those stories. Then I thought of the alternative, instant annihilation, no stories at all. "How do we send acceptance?" Rays asked quietly. I swallowed. "We've already mapped the patterns," I said. "We combine the markers for acknowledgement of dysfunction, willingness to assist, and commitment to remission. Then we mean it." "Mean it," he echoed. "The node isn't just reading raw signals," I said. "It's reading our behavior, our follow-through. If we lie, if we send acceptance but continue acting like a tumor, it will know, and the escalation will be worse." Rays closed his eyes. When he opened them, something had hardened there. "Then we don't lie," he said. Lynn let out a shuddering breath. "You're agreeing?" she asked. "I'm agreeing," he said, "because I spent my whole career defending a patch of land drawn on a map by people who died long before I was born. Nations, flags, ideas of home." He gestured vaguely at the viewport, at the faint glitter of distant stars. "Now I realize home is bigger than I ever imagined," he said. "It's the whole damn universe. If the cost of keeping it alive is letting go of our illusion of being the main character, maybe that's a price we have to pay." He looked directly at me. "And maybe we owe it to everyone back home to at least give them a chance at whatever comes next," he said. "Even if it's not humanity as we know it." My throat tightened. "You're both insane," I whispered. Lynn squeezed my hand. "We're cells in a body," she said. "For the first time, we're acting like it." I held the shard one last time. Its facets were warm. Not in the thermal sense, no instrument registered a change, but in the way it responded to my touch, like a muscle tensing. I let my mind slide along the patterns we had mapped. Acceptance. Alignment. Remission. I thought of Earth's reactors being redesigned not to maximize profit, but to minimize waste, to harmonize with the local energy flows the body preferred. I thought of city lights dimming gradually over decades as people adapted to new rhythms, new priorities. I thought of data networks being repurposed, not abandoned, serving as nerves rather than tumor circulations. I thought of our ships, no longer engines of extraction but of repair. I meant it. I sent that meaning through the shard, riding on the modulated signals we had so painstakingly learned to use. The universe shuddered. For a moment, the wave of interventions paused. Then slowly, the prescription for our region shifted. Some of the planned stellar collapses were downgraded. Instead of full core collapse supernovae, they would shed mass in controlled flares. The dark matter reconfiguration relaxed slightly. The chemo dose eased. Not removed. Just moderated. In exchange, a new vector was inserted. Outrider Station. Specifically, our node. In the map that only I could see, our tiny position flared with a new color. Not red, not yellow. Blue. A trial organ. I understood, with a clarity that made me nauseous, what the body expected. We would be its experiment. Its wedge. Its ambassador. From this little sliver of bone, from our altered minds and eventually altered descendants, a new class of cells would grow. Cells that remembered what it was to be a tumor, but had chosen instead to wield scalpels. We would go out into the infected regions. We would wield the body's tools. We would decide which civilizations were beyond saving. We would decide whether our own was. My hands trembled. The shard pulsed. "It accepted," I whispered. Lynn sagged in relief. Ray's let out a long, shaky breath. "And Earth?" he asked. The answer was not words. It was a feeling of paths branching, futures in which Earth adapted, kicking and screaming, but ultimately settling into a new equilibrium, futures in which portions of humanity refused, were excised in localized cataclysms, futures in which what rose from the ashes bore little resemblance to the primates that had first looked up at the sky and wondered. "They have a chance," I said, "more than we did yesterday." "Is that the best we can do?" Ray's asked. "For now," I said. "We never got extracted. The ship Earth promised never arrived. Maybe the mission was canceled in some cost-cutting initiative. Maybe the people who signed that directive died before they could carry it out. Maybe the body decided fuel would be better spent elsewhere. It hardly matters." By the time the first of the new interventions reached the solar system in force, Outrider was no longer just a station. It was a gland. Our orbit subtly decayed, not from friction, but from the reshaping of local space-time. Filaments of dark energy coalesced around us, giving the region a topography that had more in common with organs than orbits. We changed. Lynn's transformation completed first. She no longer looked entirely human. Her skin was veined with light, mapping out the nervous system the way medical textbooks once did, except now those nerves also interfaced with fields we had no names for. She could sense the health of nearby stars the way a doctor palpates a lymph node. Ray's changed more slowly. He held onto his humanity with a stubbornness I would once have called heroic and now recognize as a form of informational inertia. But even he began to move differently, his thoughts integrating with the larger flows. As for me, I'm no longer sure where I end and the shard begins. Sometimes I think in first-person plural. Sometimes I forget I ever had a singular pronoun. We became Outrider. Outrider became a node. From us, signals pulse outward, coordinating local interventions, guiding selective collapses, nudging our region toward a slow, painful remission instead of an apocalyptic excision. From us, one day something will launch. Not a ship in the old sense, with hulls and thrusters, but a concentration of will and structure, a clot of matter and intention that will move through the body's tissues to where more aggressive cancers fester. We will be a scalpel. We will be a drug. We will be a story told in the language of physics. But before that happens, before the last of my individual neurons dissolves fully into the network, I wanted to leave this record. For you. For anyone still listening with human ears and human fears. You are not the center of the universe. You are cells in its flesh. Your civilizations are in many ways cancers, reckless, consuming, metastasizing. But cancer is not a moral failing. It is a pattern. Patterns can change. The body does not hate you. It does not love you. It simply wants to live. If you are hearing this story, if it has reached your planet, your ship, your little pocket of resistant tissue, you still have a choice. You can continue to behave like a tumor, burning everything you touch until the body has no choice but to cut you out. Or you can accept that you are part of something vastly larger, older, and more important than your individual survival, and you can begin the slow, uncomfortable process of remission. Maybe you will become like us. Maybe you will become better. Maybe you will vanish into the larger pattern so completely that no trace of your old self remains, and the only memorial to what you once were will be the stability of the cosmos you helped maintain. From where I stand now, embedded in the bones of a living universe, that doesn't seem like such a terrible fate. After all, you were never alone. You were always a part of a body. You just didn't know that until an asteroid in the Kuiper Belt turned out to be a bone. And you, reaching out with a beam of curious energy, touched your fingers to the skeleton of God. If you found this, if you listened all the way to the end, if some part of you feels the truth of it echoing in your marrow when you walk under the stars, then the bone has reached you too. And the body is listening. What you do next will decide whether you are remembered as a cancer or as part of the cure.